and the Masters of the Universe. I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, "By the power of Grayskull!" Cringer became the mighty Battle Cat, and I became He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Only 3 others share this secret. Our friends, the Sorceress, Man-at-Arms, and Orko. Together we defend Castle Grayskull from the evil forces of Skeletor.
Good morning, and welcome to the latest episode of Babylon 5, 30 Years Later, the podcast where we usually discuss episodes of Babylon 5 30 years after their original broadcast. I say usually because that's not what's happening this week. So the we is myself and John Wilson. How you doing, John?
I am doing well, Blaine. I figured if I couldn't bring Blaine to the podcast, I'd bring the podcast to Blaine.
Okay, yes, that will work. This week we are also joined by my regular co-host from our 99 Years 100 Films podcast, where we look at Best Picture winners, Trey Hooks. How are you doing, Trey?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you followed He-Man's advice about asking for help when there's a problem too big for one, or maybe 2 people to tackle by themselves.
Yes, we got a lot of advice from He-Man this time. See, one of the ideas that John and I had for the supplementals was going through all the work that JMS had done. So any show where he contributed more than one script, we decided to go through and look back at to see his formation as a television writer before reaching Babylon 5. So he started his professional writing career as a journalist, and things were financially tight for him and his future wife, Catherine Drennan. And there was a few animated series that he enjoyed to watch that paid between $800 and $1,000 per episode. So in the early 1980s, around 1982, 83, he really needed to find work in television. And because he wasn't an established television writer, he didn't have an agent. He had no real way to get in. He had friends who were animation writers, and animation scripts have a totally different format from the rest. And funny, when he asked them for samples, the friends just kind of vanished because they were not looking to encourage competition. So after digging extensively through a library, he found a beat-up old script for the 1979 Spider-Woman animated series.
That's a show.
It's definitely a show where Marvel characters Marvel fans will recognize the character designs, and that's about it. So he found that, used that as a template, and needed a way in. So he did things in the very, very wrong way. He phoned someone at Filmation claiming that he was returning a call that got cut off with one of the producers. He missed the name. The receptionist said, well, there's only 2 producers here. One of them is Lou Scheimer, who runs the studio, and the other one was Arthur Nadell, who was executive producer on He-Man, which is the show that Joe had written the spec script for and was hoping to get a job on. So we said, oh, yeah, it sounded like Arthur. And then she asked who was returning the call. He hung up in the middle of the sentence to make it sound like they'd been cut off again, and then just showed up at the office to drop off the script. No representation, no background, nothing. But it worked out well. Arthur liked the script, but it was too similar to something that was already in the pipe, and he was invited to come in and pitch more ideas. He came in with 3 ready ideas, 2 of which were shot down, but the third he was told, go to outline. The outline was approved, he could go to script. He had it turned around in 3 days, which was very impressive for Arthur, because most of his other writers took 3 or 4 times that much time to turn in the script. And often when they did turn it, or if they turned it in at all, sometimes they never came in. So he got a couple of freelance scripts. So his first 3 episodes were freelance before he was offered a job as a staff writer. The reason that he was gunning for He-Man was because he could tell that, yes, someone actually was paying attention to the world building details. There's a lot of consistency. It's a lot of fantasy, but the science fiction concepts were well thought out. So someone designing the show knew what they were doing. When he was a staff writer, he was introduced to that person who designed the show and knew what they were doing. And that was a man by the name of Lawrence DiTillio.
We've heard that name before.
Yes, several times. So this is where they met. And they liked to compete with each other to see who could turn the scripts around fastest, starting from scratch. So sit down, write a script, no outline, no nothing, turn that in. He didn't mention which script that was, but JMS won that contest by 4 hours. Took him 8 hours to DiTillio's 12. So they were having fun making it. And we'll leave the story off there. I've omitted some of the details. This was covered in Becoming Superman, the Straczynski autobiography that I highly recommend to anyone. It's hardcover, paperback, and it's on Audible, read by Peter Jurasik. So it's fascinating life. It's amazing what opportunities he had growing up and what he was able to do with them.
I have not watched He-Man in, I don't know, since I was a child. I remember trying to, because, one of the things I do as a nerdy fan thing is re-explore the properties I enjoyed as a child. And one of those was, of course, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, because I watched that every day. And I went back and watched the first episode or two, and I just could not finish it. I couldn't sit through. I was like, I don't want to watch more of this. So I don't know if the series evolved and changed and improved over time. But like these episodes we're going to talk about today, while they are juvenile, they are He-Man, they are 1980, 4 or 5 episodes. They're not bad. They're not bad cartoons. So I kind of regret now not having stuck more with my He-Man watching when I had the time and interest level to do it.
Trey, how about you?
I definitely watched the show as a kid, at least throughout. I know it was a syndicated show, but like its primary first run. I first probably got exposed to He-Man with the DC Comics Presents issue, and it was my main toy line as a kid. Very similar to John, I probably hadn't watched it since it aired until the DVD box set came out. And I agree with you, John. Some of the initial first season episodes are a little hard going, but some of the ones that I remembered as classics, like the first one that introduces the dragons and Graven, etc., those still really held up. But it was not a show to where you could like pop in a disc and watch the whole disc.
Okay,
yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of us are in the same boat then, because yes, the He-Man was my toy of choice when it was new, which actually started. I remember it was my Uncle Darren who got me He-Man and Battle Cat for Christmas. So this was a series that ran 2 seasons at 65 episodes each. JMS was involved in season 2, and I had the same experience. It was, must-see TV in the original run. When I first picked up the DVDs, again, usual thing when I'm watching a show that I enjoyed, pop in the disc, hit play all, and I couldn't make it all the way through the disc. It's still a tough show to binge because of the style of juvenile television at the time. And I haven't rewatched all the episodes recently to know which were the ones that were really dragging, but I flipped through the credits on the IMDb, and there's a lot of lower rated episodes in season 1, especially early season 1, written by people who do not continue writing for the series in the second half of season 1 or at all in season 2.
So whoever helped get the show off the ground, those were not the minds and the creative juices that kept it going.
Yeah, it was a mix. So some of the early writers, like Paul Dini, was here from the start, and he stayed. And he's a guy who's still got a track record. It seems like not everybody was working out. So there's, a little bit of a yo-yo on top of the normal growing pains of a show, trying to figure out what it is coming from pilot. And when you're producing 65 episodes a year, it's not like you could see, finished cuts of the first 2 episodes before you sit down to write episode 8.
Right.
More like, oh, we're 3 weeks into production, so they've got 12 episodes in the bank now because they're going to be releasing 5 a week. So I think the release schedule just made that those usual growing pains probably the same number of weeks, but that corresponds to a whole lot more episodes, especially when they started commissioning scripts in 1982 and the show hit the air in 1985.
And animation takes a long time, right? So
Yeah.
it's one of the things about 65 episodes a year for 2 solid seasons, and then they go right from this into She-Ra with a similar production count. That's a lot of animation. That's a lot of cartoon that you are cranking out.
And it's not the only show that they're producing either.
Mm-hmm.
No, but it was Filmation's first huge hit.
Yep.
Now, the Filmation style shows where they invested in the initial animation of stuff. So there's a lot of rotoscoping for fairly natural actions. But once they had it, the idea was use that existing footage again as often as humanly possible to maintain the production schedules and keep the budgets down.
Yeah, and you can tell when there are motions that were different and specially animated because they're just not normal motions versus, walking toward the camera or turning around or all those other things that happen every few seconds.
Right. So by the time you get to, say, the end of season 2, the new animation that they'd be using would be for the new toy they have to promote or the new situation. But you could have a 23-minute episode with 5 minutes of new animation and everything else was reused. The musical score is memorable. Years later, I still remember every note. It was, much bigger orchestra than I was used to in cartoons. And even as a kid, I realized they commissioned like 15 minutes of music for this entire series. And they were just using it over and over and over.
Lots and lots of different cues, but not super long cues. Just on repeat. Like, have you ever listened to the original Super Mario Brothers soundtrack, just like straight through? So the second level, the underground level, first level, the music, has some length to it. Of course, it's on loop. The second level, it's like 10 seconds of music. And like it's just, and then back to the beginning. Like it's super short. And that's kind of why I feel like the cues were here. You have a lot of variety of music for drama and intrigue and mystery and happiness and silliness and all those other things, but the cues aren't that long, and they can play it on loop.
I don't know this for a fact, but I think they also used some of their stock music. I think if you go and watch some of the Filmation Flash Gordon, anything, you'll recognize some of the non-iconic He-Man scoring in it.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that kind of the weird, the wow or whatever, like when they're in a swamp setting or something. You'll hear that also in like the Flash Gordon cartoon.
I have definitely heard He-Man sound effects and He-Man musical cues and other things over the years.
Yeah, they had a few. They started in the 1960s.
Oh, yeah, Filmation's been doing stuff for a long time.
Yeah, we've got like Rod Rocket, The New Adventures of Superman, The Adventures of Superboy, The Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure.
And, I don't know if I'm the biggest Superman fan on the call, but I'm a really, really big Superman fan. I've seen all of those old Filmation shows. And you know what's not great? The animation. And honestly, the storytelling too. I watched all of the 1960s Superman cartoons so that I can have watched them. I did not necessarily enjoy the experience.
So I'm more of a Batman guy, John, but you're telling me you can't appreciate a Filmation Scarecrow that looks like maybe a scarecrow from a kid's coloring book? With the big jolly smile and everything? That's not right.
That's how my Scarecrow looks. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, it's a whole thing.
It is. So yeah, they had done that. They'd done Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, the Brady Kids.
Not the Brady Kids.
Yes, which I didn't realize was originally from 1972 to 74.
I liked the Fat Albert cartoon as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Star Trek the Animated Series was Filmation.
Yes, I remember when I first started watching Star Trek, the animated series, I was like, oh, these are the same people who did He-Man. It's all the exact same poses and motions. It's just different people.
Yeah, that would have been the same rotoscoping source. For those who aren't familiar, rotoscoping is filming someone in live action and then projecting the frames of that motion one at a time to trace them onto the animation cells. So you get much more realistic motion. It was an animation technique that was developed by the Fleischer Studios in the 1930s. And they patented it, they locked it down, so anyone using it between the 1930s and the 1970s had to pay first Fleischer and then Paramount after Paramount bought them out. Disney famously said that they didn't need that. Their animators were that good, never paid a dime for it. And then after the patent or that restricted use expired, then a few more years for statute of limitations to expire, and then they released Sleeping Beauty on DVD with bonus features we'd never seen about them doing rotoscoping techniques to animate Sleeping Beauty.
Nice.
But just to go through the other major Filmation shows, there's a lot of Archie adaptations, Gilligan's Island, a lot of DC stuff. So the live action Shazam and Secrets of Isis, the Ghostbusters, not the real Ghostbusters. There's a distinction that we'll talk about in a future episode. The Batman Tarzan Adventure Hour, which is a very interesting combination. Yeah, and then there's the New Adventures of Flash Gordon starting in 1979, Batman and the Super 7, and then the Kids Superpower Hour with Shazam. I definitely remember that was Shazam and Hero High. I never got the animated Shazam, but I've got the Hero High cartoon on DVD. And then when we're getting into 1982, this was more my childhood. Gilligan's Planet, He-Man, The Adventures of Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids relaunch. So Lone Ranger was there, the Tarzan Lone Ranger Zorro Adventure Hour, which they split up because I distinctly remember the Saturday morning lineup I had as a child on Channel 2, the CFRN branch of CTV up here. I would watch the live action Lone Ranger and the animated Lone Ranger and live action Gilligan's Island and animated Gilligan's Planet and live action Star Trek and then the animated Star Trek. That was their Saturday morning lineup.
Get it all queued up.
Yep.
So we're going to be talking today about the He-Man episodes that J. Michael Straczynski himself penned, which were 9 episodes.
Yes.
And I don't know. Do we want to? How do we want to tackle this?
How about first? I've got the 9 up. I don't know if we want to name them all first, or because listeners probably know we have an agenda that doesn't really fit in multiple episodes. I'm thinking maybe run through them in the broadcast order, which I have queued up in tabs here. Give the little synopsis and then comments on it with 9 episodes, even at 2 or 3 minutes each. That's going to be a decent sized podcast. So I'm thinking just maybe a couple general comments if we have any on each, and then focus more on the overall of how they work.
Well, how about if we get to the individual episodes, were there any overall things about these episodes in Straczynski's writing that like I noticed that whenever you are watching several episodes by the same writer, if he likes a particular saying or particular concept, he might use it a lot. Like that's why I did the opening thing about bring the podcast to Blaine, because at least twice, maybe 3 times, there is a takeoff of the phrase, if you can't bring Muhammad to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad in the show. And it's like, oh, Straczynski had a thing. He liked that phrase. And also there's a lot of comics, especially DC and Superman comics in these episodes.
Yeah. Basically managed to bring in Mr. Mixia Spitlick, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars.
You could argue Bizarro, kind of. And I don't know how many either of you watched. I just watched these 9. So I was surprised, maybe not surprised, but Straczynski did not like focusing on Skeletor. So, we will see Skeletor in some of these, but these are not, 9 episodes of Skeletor scheming against He-Man.
No, he's very much in the background to this whole run. And of course, there's the classic Skeletor thing of taking credit for other people's ideas, but that's the most that he does in this.
Yeah, I watched a little more than the 9, just so I could contrast it with the rest. So I did buy both seasons on DVD before I watched any of them, which could be why I invested in season 2 as well as 1, because it wasn't that great to watch season 1. But for this, we mentioned that it is tough to binge, partly because of the age. But yeah, for the podcast, I would put in a disc, whichever one had JMS's episodes. I would start playing with JMS's first episode and then just let the disc play. So I probably watched about 15 or 16 episodes total, because JMS's would be arranged in batches for some reason. So you'd often have 3 on one disc and a couple others. So yeah, I've seen a little bit of a contrast. And so yeah, there are definitely things Straczynski was more likely to do than the other writers in that somewhat random sample of other people's stuff. So I did find, generally speaking, comparison, in this era, you would have significantly less fees for getting a show on the air if you could argue it had educational content. So at the end of each episode, He-Man or some other character will explicitly say, here is the moral of today's story.
Mm-hmm.
So
Here's what we learned today.
Yeah, that way they could qualify for the educational production and broadcast discount. So it was really common in this era. And now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
Right. Transformers did not have PSAs.
No.
They did not.
No. But yeah, when He-Man did this, looking at the other episodes, you compare it to JMS. When you're watching a JMS episode, you could have 2 or 3 characters with 2 or 3 different storylines who learn 2 or 3 different lessons. So it's hard to predict exactly which one they're going to have at the end of the episode because you have multiple to choose from. The others, sometimes it's easy to predict what moral they're going to have because every character learns the same lesson in a slightly different way. Or maybe not a different way. Maybe it's just 3 characters who are almost interchangeable as they're going through the same adventure side by side the whole time. There are other times with other writers where it is difficult to predict what the lesson is because it seems to have no connection to the rest of the story. They just told the story, couldn't find a moral in it, so they just made up a moral for the sake of having a moral at the end.
Wow. There was one, I can't remember which one, that I kind of felt like they were stretching for their moral. But for the most part, they worked really well.
I remember a G.I. Joe episode to where the moral was fire safety, and the tie-in was we didn't really feature barbecue at all in this episode, but he was one of the 6 Joes on the mission. So the moral's fire safety, even though the episode had nothing to do with fire. All of the Straczynski episodes, the lessons were definitely tied in with the plot.
So speaking of plots, the first episode listed is Origin of the Sorceress. The plot summary on the IMDb says, the Sorceress realizes her old enemy Morgoth is attempting to return to Eternia. She decides to make a stand and tells He-Man how her first battle against Morgoth caused her to take up the mantle of Sorceress of Grayskull.
So this was the first one on the list, and I was super excited to see it. And honestly, it made me super excited for the entire run because it's the Origin of the Sorceress. It's a lore episode. And one of the things about, shows like this is you don't get a lot of lore episodes. They just kind of happen when they happen. And yeah, I rather liked this. I don't remember Morgoth looking like this whenever he was conquering Middle Earth. But maybe whenever he was Melkor, he looked different, and now he looks like Morgoth. I don't know.
Well, he might have changed appearance when he teamed up with Data's evil twin. So that lore episode.
Too soon.
This was the hardest episode for me to watch, but it wasn't because of the story. I was like you, John. I was like, ooh, the Origin of the Sorceress. But the breathless voice acting that the actress who does the Sorceress, I found that while the hurry He-Man, for 3 minutes out of an episode didn't grate on my nerves. But when it was the same pitch and the same modulation for like the entire 20-minute episode, it started it started grating. But that's not Straczynski's fault.
No, it's not. But yeah, the voice for the actress of the sorceress is definitely, yeah. And I think they only have their quantity of female voices for this show is significantly less than their quantity of male voices for the show. So I don't know if she does another voice very differently, and so she's doing the voice, the breathlessness to sound unusual. I have not looked at the cast, but yeah.
Yeah, this has there are a lot of reuses. IMDb just has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 credited voice talents here, and then they're all / ... So they have more than one character, but they're only listing one. So He-Man was voiced by John Irwin. Alan Oppenheimer has Man-at-Arms listed as the first voice. He was also Skeletor.
Oh, okay.
Linda Gary is Teela and others. So I think Teela and the Sorceress have the same voice actress.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, Lou Scheimer was Orko and other voices.
Really? He does his Orko voice. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I thought Sorceress was probably Teela, but I was not sure because I hadn't looked it up.
So those are the 4 that are credited in all 130 episodes. Erica Scheimer is credited in 65.
Okay. It was cool seeing, one of the big things about the Sorceress is she's always, dressed like a bird. So seeing her in actual, clothes, it was kind of surprising. And she was kind of short. And yeah, but I did enjoy this. I liked how the Ring of Fire was the trigger event. And I mean, she's like, oh, this is like what happened, 65 years ago. It's happening again. I'll tell the story and we're going to solve it the same way. And that's, it's kind of a formulaic episode, but still, I enjoyed seeing her background.
Yeah, I think that the content it brings is good. It's just, I might have enjoyed it a little more if I'd watched it as the last of the 9 instead of the first of the 9. Because again, it's right, yes, this show has not aged terribly well. Right, that was kind of my first reaction. And if I was more used to that and had the context before I came in, I might have enjoyed it a little bit more. Although, like I said, I did appreciate that they were building backstory. This is one of the few shows that did that. There's also a Paul Dini episode where Teela's trying to find out who her birth parents were because she was adopted by Man-at-Arms after her father, who was one of his soldiers, died in battle. And I don't remember if they explicitly stated or not, but Sorceress is Teela's mother.
Right. They always dance around that, but it's there.
Yeah. There's also an episode with the origin of Battle Cat and how Prince Adam adopted him, written by D.C. Fontana.
Oh, fun. The 2 swords of power were in this briefly. And, the whole multiple swords thing, or 2 halves of the sword, depending on which of the franchise you're looking at. That's something that I feel like exists in the storyline, but doesn't get brought up a lot in the show. And so just having that reference here as, oh yeah, this is what the whole show's about. That and the secrets of Castle Grayskull.
I was actually surprised when I saw the design on the 2 swords of power, because one of them has the crystal in the middle. So the lore on this series is that one of the swords of power was split in half. He-Man has one half and Skeletor has the other. And the one with the crystal in the middle is the sword She-Ra has. And She-Ra had not been announced yet.
No, but there's, and I will remember it when we get to it, but there's another episode that kind of foreshadows She-Ra, if you will, in the J. Michael Straczynski run.
Yeah, and I was just surprised that production design came in, because this was freelance. Straczynski had no idea She-Ra was coming, because it was actually he and DiTilio, as we'll get to when we talk about that. Those are the 2 who were asked to create that series.
Well, and by the time this episode came out, She-Ra was in production, but at the time that it was, contracted and written, years before it was released, was She-Ra coming down the pike,
Yeah, it wasn't known when it was written, at least not to JMS. So I think this was something that they'd started doing on the design. So by the time they got to animating it, they know, oh, this is going to be a thing, so put it there. So I was just impressed that it showed up in season 2, episode 8. So they must have had a lot of time between script and animation, because even the evil villains here, they've got the Hordak symbol on their chests. This is the evil horde, so that's not Skeletor and his crew, this is She-Ra's adversary.
I did not even catch that.
Okay, so this is that one. I was going to say that there was one to where, you had the guys in the spaceships and they had like the little horde bat symbol on their chest.
Yep, this is the one. So by the time they animated this, they must have known She-Ra was coming because the pieces are there.
Interesting.
And I know the split sword thing was from the mini comics and the action figure line. Was that part of the animated series as well?
I don't remember
the
that being
Skeletor,
the animated
He-Man
series.
split sword. Okay.
The fact that they both had a sword in the toys confused me as a kid. If it got mentioned on the show, it's one of those things that gets mentioned and is never talked about.
I don't remember the show well enough to know whether it was there. I do remember that the toys were designed for the split. So when He-Man and Skeletor toys first came out, I think it was He-Man's that had the groove in the back and Skeletor's had the tab, so you could actually stick them together if you had both figures.
Right.
Correct. And unless you were pressing the tab on the jaw bridge from inside, the only way to open the jaw bridge from the outside of the playset was to have the two halves of the sword together and insert them as the key.
Nice.
Yes. And if people are not familiar, Trey was not mispronouncing drawbridge. Castle Grayskull's drawbridge is the jaw of the skull in it. So they actually do call it the jaw bridge.
Okay, let's talk for 1 second about Castle Grayskull, because that's a design. It looks like, from a wide view, it looks like some sort of weird insectile skeleton with like the castle being the head and these bones coming out, but like skeletons, of course, insects don't have skeletons. So that's just, it's weird. It's bony and it's weird. And Skeletor's throne is also made of bones and has a similar aesthetic. So like Skeletor's throne, Castle Grayskull, who's building all of this stuff the same way? And
yeah, it was definitely a design choice. I had the toy as
impressed.
a child, and I remember aunts and uncles being shocked that, oh, this is the good guy's base with this giant green skull?
And the fact that the bad guy has a giant skull for a head. I mean, we all have skulls for heads, but you know what I mean?
Right.
It's an interesting choice. And I'm wondering if there was a lore aspect that like somehow Skeletor and Castle Grayskull are connected in ways that give him a right to try to conquer it, even though he's not a good person to deserve conquering it, that sort of thing. I don't know.
It wouldn't surprise me if Castle Grayskull and Snake Mountain were connected like the two halves of the swords on some level. I just don't know where we would find that story if it exists.
If it exists, right. There are He-Man experts out there who are telling us everything in the microphone that we're not hearing, but we can't hear y'all. You're far away, and it's after the fact.
Well, at least in the DC Comics miniseries, Grayskull was more like the Dungeons and Dragons dungeon that, the both parties were trying to get into, with Zodak as kind of the weird dungeon master figure, both helping and hindering both parties.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else on Sorceress. Do you want to go on to the next episode?
Sure. This would be Trouble's middle name. He-Man and the gang are invited to the Sun Temple to witness the charging of the Sunstone. But along the way, they meet Prankster, a joker from Orko's planet, Trolla, who keeps causing problems for the gang.
I liked the beginning of this, the fake out with the morality choice. And then, of course, this is a Mixes Pitlick episode, straight up, down, and center.
Oh, yeah. This is Mixes Pitlick. And JMS was already online in Dial-Up bulletin boards at this point. He was one of the first people to be online. So I'm wondering, when did they come up with the internet definition of troll? Because I swear, this prankster is just trolling them, and he's from planet Trolla. What I don't know is if that was already established or not.
I think Orko's planet was probably established previous to this, because we're already well into the second season. The fact that he's from Trolla, I'm sure, was mentioned before. So
do you think Orko's in some kind of like witness protection? Because every time we see somebody else from Trolla, you can clearly see their face, but Orka's the eyes hidden in the shadows of his hat and scarf.
Could be.
Or he's like social anxiety and just doesn't like to have his. He's the teens these days wearing hoodies. Kids these days, they're Dan Fogelberg records and their hula hoops. Anyways, but I like this one. I don't know, other than the use of the concept of Mixius Pitalik and the name Prankster, both very obviously pulled from Superman. I did like that Prankster, while a mischievous cad, was not actually the source of all the trouble in this episode.
Mm-mm.
Is making mischief, not causing evil.
Unusual for a cartoon whose purpose is to promote the toy line. You know, don't get me wrong, of course, as always, there's Men-at-Arms, Orko, and He-Man, but you don't really have any figures that you're selling here.
Yeah, this prankster character, Mr. Mixius Pitlik analog, he didn't have a toy.
And Negator wasn't one of the core villains at all.
Yeah, this is not a toy-focused episode at all. Which you're right, is unusual because the cartoons were very much designed to be toy marketing devices.
Yeah, and this was the first cartoon that really showed the power of having the tie-in cartoon available with the toys instead of making the toys if the show's a success. This is the first time they said, well, what if we do it simultaneous and launch everywhere and promote the heck out of it? And oh my God, did it work.
Oh, yeah.
That became the de facto standard for the next several years with G.I. Joe and Transformers and Care Bears and Rainbow Bright and Strawberry Shortcake and My Little Pony. And
well, it's still a major factor because one of the reasons that DC's Young Justice went off the air for so long is that it wasn't generating the toy sales that it needed to because its audience was older.
And that's also why Green Lantern, the animated series, only got one season. I thought it was a really good show.
I really enjoyed that show.
Yeah, but the company that had the toy license also had the toy license for the Ryan Reynolds movie, and those toys didn't move, so they decided not to invest in the animated series. And then Warner Brothers didn't get the return they wanted. It was doing well in the ratings, but it wasn't selling toys, so they pulled it.
Yeah, so even today, many moons later, you got to sell toys to have cartoons.
Well, and I know that. So I've seen the story repeated both on Wikipedia and the Toys That Made Us. The whole concept from the cartoon came from, their cool promotional idea was the mini comics, which was also kind of a new thing. But someone got cold feet on those and was like, well, but kids don't read. Okay, well, we'll also do a TV show to promote the line.
I remember reading those mini comics. Every time I got a figure, I would read a comic. But the lore was different for the comics versus the cartoons.
Vastly different.
Yep.
Up until probably the third wave of figures, I think then it started because you had some that were actual like adaptations of some of the cartoon episodes.
Okay.
Yeah, I know those would be tied into that character, and some of them were inserted at random. I remember there was a comic that explained Fisto's origin, and I remember when I was buying them myself, I would go through all the racks on the shelf, because if they had 4 Fistos on that shelf, they could have 4 different mini comics in them, so I wasn't just buying the action figure, I was looking at the mini comics going, do I have that one yet? Do I have that one yet? Do I have that one yet? But yeah, aside from the fact that this is Mixius Pitlik in He-Man, I don't know what more there is to say about this one. Do you guys have any other comments, or do we move on to episode 3?
I'm good.
Good.
All right. His third episode, Journey to Stone City. This would be the last of his freelance then, assuming they were made in sequence. Evelyn finds the legendary Stone City the heroic warriors have been looking for and turns the recently awoken warrior leader Vokan against He-Man and Castle Grayskull.
This was impressive for Evelyn because she really goes far in this one to try to make her own bones for her place as the leader of the evil people. I thought that was pretty great. I feel like Evelyn is one of those characters that exists in concept and in imagination as a much stronger character than she actually exists in the show. But this was a good showcase for her.
Oh, yeah. If you've seen, and I may get the name of it wrong, is it Masters of the Universe Revelations? That's the Kevin Smith adaptation?
Yes, the recent series, yeah.
Yeah. I think this is where he got his idea of Evelyn from.
Yeah, I was going to bring that series up at the end of this, because that really feels like someone who grew up loving this particular incarnation of He-Man saying, okay, this was out 30 years ago or 40 years ago. What if I was doing seasons 39 and 40 and just continuing in this vein, changing things up a little? But yeah, that series feels more like this one than any of the other incarnations of He-Man I've seen in between. And there have been a few, but I wasn't planning to dwell on those because JMS had no involvement in them.
Yeah. We're not a He-Man podcast. We're a JMS podcast.
Yeah, no, I just bring it up because I think from what I remember of the cartoon, starting with this one and seeing how he uses her in his other episodes, I think he set the template for Evelyn that others would follow.
I would agree. And I think by the time people hear this, the Masters of the Universe Revolution, the second season, should be out. Not to be confused with the other He-Man series that Netflix is producing, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which is also enjoyable. At least the first season was. I haven't really gone back to it. That's a clean start, but it actually has the origin of Skeletor in there, who is He-Man's uncle or Prince Adam's uncle in the lore. They're actually putting that lore on screen. Yeah, so if it's traditionally animated, that's the Kevin Smith one. If it's a CGI series that looks like He-Man skips leg day, that's the other one.
Of course he skips leg day. He doesn't work out. He's just naturally like this. I don't go to the gym.
Yeah, it's just, like I said, I like the writing on the show, and the designs are definitely clear. You know, it's just them, but proportionately, it's like his waist is where his knees should be.
Well, we're not going to make fun of him. He's sensitive about it. But yeah, this was a good episode for Evil Lynn, and I'm not sure that anything else about it stands out except for, the science in this with like the exact alignment of the sun and everything, and how it only happens every once. And they do another one later, I think, with the stars or the moon. So it happens only once every so many years and years and years. I'm like, I don't know that that's a thing, but maybe it is.
Yeah, for alignments like that, what you're really looking for is the least common multiple of all the orbital periods. So they are often exaggerated. I saw things a few years ago going, oh, there's 5 Saturdays and 5 Sundays in July. This hasn't happened in over 500 years. And I was going, how about 28? Because, 7 days in a week plus leap years every 4. So the calendar's going to repeat every 28 years, except we have different rules for the actual turn of the century thing, because we'd have too many leap years if we consistently did them every 4 years. So then you skip the leap year if it's a century like 1900 or 1800, but then that's overcompensating. So we skipping the leap year if it's a multiple of 400. So the year 2000 was a leap year. 1900 was not. 2100 will not be. And then even that wasn't perfect, but now we're coordinating enough. We can just do leap seconds. So every once in a while, we just have another second tacked onto a day.
Because time is weird.
Yes, and because the length of the day is actually altering as the moon slowly drifts out of orbit and Earth and the moon start going to one-to-one spin orbit coupling. The length of the day was about 20 hours in the dinosaur time. Now it's closer to 24 hours. When it slows down to 28 hours, we will not only have the same side of the moon facing Earth at all times, we'll have the same side of the Earth facing the moon at all times. So it'll look almost like a geostationary orbit where the moon is just sitting in the sky. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add about this one. Do you, Trey?
Nope.
All right, so next up, it's Double Trouble. Skeletor uses the Mirror of Moravad to make an evil clone of He-Man's ally, Kaldar. This is where the meme comes from, guys. This is the one where what we think is Skeletor walks through the mirror and then punches it behind him.
I really wanted the mirror's name to be something backwards. I don't think it is, though.
I was going to say, this is the one that made me reference Bizarro, because it's not like the Star Trek version of the evil duplicate. The mirror creates the literal opposite of, so you get a good Skeletor.
Yeah, the morality reversal. It's kind of like in the 60s when you'd hit Thor in the back of the head and suddenly he's evil for it. But I liked that we had to get everybody to trust Skeletor. I wish, and of course there's time constraints and everything else, but I do wish they had let that linger just a little bit longer with everyone not wanting to trust him, because they do jump on the Skeletor bandwagon pretty quickly. And He-Man leads the way on that. He-Man just like decides, okay, we're going to trust Skeletor.
I think you and I mentioned it in a text or off air, Blaine. This was the one that by the title to where I was like, oh, it's a Faker episode. Wait, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah. Although there is a Faker episode where it really goes the full Bizarro length, where the fake He-Man is blue.
Oh, dear.
And none of the characters seem to notice that the evil He-Man that Skeletor created is blue. So they all think he's He-Man because they made the toy blue to set him aside.
You think it's one of those things that there's a toy of evil He-Man?
Yeah, there's a toy of Faker, which is He-Man, but blue, because the manufacturers wanted to make it separate. That's actually one of the things that they had. One of the fights that Filmation was trying for that they lost was to have Prince Adam smaller than He-Man, because they didn't think that this secret identity was going to work. It's just changing his outfit and the pitch of his voice. But the toy company, Mattel, I want to say, wanted to use the same sculpted torso for almost every male character. So if you take the heads and arms off, He-Man, Skeletor, Prince Adam, they have identical torsos. Same with Man-at-Arms. It was a cost-saving thing. So those who criticize it for saying that Prince Adam and He-Man look the same and people wouldn't buy it, right? Later cartoons, they have different physiques. This one, it's a completely valid criticism. Just stop aiming it at the cartoon people. They understood, they agreed, and they fought, and they lost because the rights holders said, no, we're making the toys cheaply.
I never considered as a kid that people would not believe Prince Adam was He-Man. I'm sorry, that people would not suspect that Prince Adam was He-Man. That never occurred to me. It's a lot more obvious with the whole Superman Clark Kent thing, but I don't know. To me, just like different. Well, I mean, obviously their faces are exactly the same, so really it should not have worked at all. But it worked for me as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that wasn't a great element to the mythos here. So, but that's another thing I like, the way Kevin Smith handled it in the pilot episode, where others have figured out his secret. So no spoilers, because they make some story choices in that first episode that were not expected.
Yeah, they were really, really ruined.
Yeah, I was really happy with that series. I strongly recommend it if you enjoy this one. Or if you remember enjoying it as a child, maybe you just watch the Kevin Smith one and don't necessarily come back and revisit this one.
And that's okay.
So any other comments on Double Trouble?
I'm good.
All right. Battle of the Dragons. He-Man and Man-at-Arms are invited to Darksmoke and Orko tags along. But the evil dragon Morningstar steals the magic flame of Granomir and blames the Eternians to start a new war between dragons and humans.
This was one of the more complex story ideas, I thought.
Well, I agree, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we cover the last episode, Cold Zone. But I think JMS is showing his talent for both politics and developing cultures here. You know, Granomir and the dragons were a recurring thing in the He-Man cartoon. I just did a quick search. I think this is, the 5th episode to have Granomir at least in it. But this was the first time like it felt like there was a dragon culture.
Right. Yeah, the cultural elements and the fact that they're not monolithic. I mean, they're mostly monolithic. You have 2 dragons who are characters and the rest are just dragons. Mm-hmm. But those 2 characters have very different views on things. And that's not super common when you have the alien race in a children's cartoon.
Yeah, or even some other cartoons. Like I see more diversity in the culture of these dragons than you do in Klingons on the original Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the complexity of Morningstar's scheme is fairly impressive too. most of the children's shows at the time, they would keep the schemes simple because they thought, well, we want to make sure the kids can understand it. Whereas Straczynski's like, kids can be smart.
Kids can be smart. And we can have variations on the morality. They don't all have to believe the same way. They don't all have to have the same goals. We can have different people with different ideas, and they can still all be from the same place.
All right. So, any more for Battle of the Dragons?
Nope.
All right. So from here we go to the Magic Falls. Evil Lyn plans to magically disguise Cobra Khan so he can infiltrate Eternos on Eternia Day, and Skeletor makes sure Orko won't hinder them by getting rid of his magic powers. He-Man and Orko travel to the Magic Falls to get them back. And what the synopsis leaves out is that the reason they think this is a good way or a good time to infiltrate Eternos is because on Eternia Day, people can ask King Randor for a favor, and he will do what he can to grant that favor and make things better for them on this day of the year. But they figure the scepter he has is the symbol of power and leadership. So if Cobra Khan can steal it, then they can become the rightful rulers of Eternia somehow.
So it's a bit of a stretch, but bear with me, John. If I filed the numbers off of this, I think this is a Brainiac Lex Luthor plot. We've got a limited window to do something. Lex Luthor's going to disguise himself to put him in the position to steal the Hoots at What's It or whatever. Brainiac whips up something that takes away Superman's powers, and Superman has to go on a quest to get his powers back in time to stop Luthor and Brainiac.
You're not wrong. That could definitely work for that kind of a team up. Yeah.
And I say that like it's a good thing. Like that's not a bad thing, but
No. It's funny that this is the Magic Falls because obviously that's the MacGuffin of the quest is trying to get to the Magic Falls, but everything else about the episode doesn't really involve those falls.
And this is the first time I feel like we see it from Straczynski. We'll see it in some of the other episodes. One of the limitations of the cartoon, and I don't think it's not a Straczynski limitation. This is just what you had to deal with, right? Was you always had to focus on the core three. So your heroes were always He-Man, Orko, and Man-at-Arms, with maybe Tila substituted for Man-at-Arms with the occasional guest hero. So that meant most of your variation was the villains. So other than a spotlight episode, you don't see a lot of the toys spotlighted beyond the first couple of waves, except for the villains. So here we get Cobra Khan, who, based off of the rest of the episodes, was a much bigger villain than he was in my toy playing. I'll just put it that way. He was one of the few figures in the waves that I bought that I did not get. And it's because his special action was water-based. And I always hated water-based special action toys because they were messy. They would leak, so I never picked up Cobra Khan as a figure.
And you can only really play with them in the bathtub.
Yep.
Yeah, because I think, this was the one that would spray the water out of his mouth, right?
Yeah, and then there was later like a heroic elephant-based figure that kind of did the same thing, but yeah. But because of the whole water motif, he was one of the few that I never picked up.
Okay, yeah, the one I was thinking of at first for the toys was King Hiss.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another snake-based character that came later who looked human, but you could take the shell of the upper torso off, and he was made of snakes inside. For some reason, that was the toy I was associating with Cobra Khan. Until you just mentioned him, that Cobra Khan was water-based. So then I looked him up, and oh yeah, that's a totally different one. But I don't think I ever had Cobra Khan, but I had King Hiss. So who I don't think ever actually made it to the series.
This is the one episode of the ones that we looked at where the secret identity troubles are a thing, which does happen from time to time in He-Man. It's very much a comic book, Peter Parker, Superman kind of thing, where your secret identity gets in the way of your heroic life gets in the way of your secret identity, or vice versa. It's not played up in He-Man as much, but it's also not unheard of or isolated to this. Of the ones that we watch, I think it's the only one where it comes up.
Yeah, I don't remember them spending a lot of time on it, and that might be because the people at Filmation knew we can't shine a light on this because it doesn't work.
Well, and going back to what I said about the core, if you're using the core of and I'm going to call him Duncan and not Men at Arms. If you go with the core of Duncan, Orko, and Battle Cat, they all know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tila was the recurring regular and Adam's parents who didn't know.
The fact that his parents didn't know makes me laugh. I don't know. I just feel like having spent so much time with Superboy and Smallville and everything else is just like the superhero's parents always know. But then, of course, Aunt May didn't know. So,
Yep. That's one of the things I liked about the original Nova Human Rocket series was about 20, or one of the last issues in that 23, 24 issue series. Richard Rider just said, okay, I am sick and tired of playing these games and lying to friends and family. Called them all together and said, okay, I am Nova. Any questions?
good times.
So any other comments on the Magic Falls?
Not here.
Actually, I do have the one. I did appreciate the ending because the sentient being in the Magic Falls seems to be getting a little senile and has a hard time sending them where they want to go. So that's how they deal with the villain, is they just send him through the Magic Falls.
Oh, yeah, that Guardian guy. I swear I've seen that character design in other shows.
Well, that could well be. It is Filmation.
Yeah, I think he world hops.
Which makes sense.
All right, so now Mistaken Identity. Young Farron pretends to be He-Man's secret identity to impress his girlfriend Kirill. But all his boasting leads him to be captured by self-made villain Modulok, who wants to join Skeletor's gang. No, this is definitely a case of broadcast order and production order being different, because this is the origin story for Modulok, who had previously appeared on the series, just not in the JMS episodes.
I could have sworn that Modulok was a She-Ra toy.
So in the She-Ra cartoon, Hordak and the Horde were She-Ra villains. But with the exception of the female cat figure, and I don't remember the character's name, Hordak and the Horde as toys were marketed as He-Man figures. They were like the Destro to Skeletor and He-Man, to where Hordak and Skeletor don't really team up, but they're that third faction who can go against either or both.
You say you didn't remember the cat character's name?
And
It's Catra.
Oh, Catra. Okay, duh. But
Yeah, just think Spock's soul.
yeah,
Yeah.
her figure was marketed as a She-Ra figure, but the others weren't. And I remember Modulok was the most expensive action figure because
he was just an action figure. He comes apart.
Yeah,
right.
I'm
So
actually looking
he
at
came in a
photo of
box.
that
It was like 30 pieces.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. It is definitely Masters of the Universe, the Evil Horde. So it was setting him aside as that third faction. He's got the mini comic, and then there's two other sections. So it's the size that card would have been big enough to put two figures on, because the other section is just the other pieces. That aspect wasn't heavily used in this particular episode, but yeah, the idea of Modulok was that he was modular, so you could replace this arm with that arm, and
Yeah,
they're not functionally all that different from what I'm seeing. It's just different designs.
yeah. But I clearly remember because I got $5 for doing my chores, and typically that either went to a He-Man figure, which was $5, or to 20 quarter books at the local comic book store. And Modulok, I think, was closer to $10 or $15 because of the size difference in the different parts. And the closest you get to the modular is, I think there's a part here to where like he manipulates his ears to make them more bat-like so he can hear something on the other side of a door or something. He stretches and elongates his ears.
Yeah, or was it the other side of a door or the other side of the park so he could hear the kid bragging that he was He-Man to his girlfriend?
Mm-hmm.
It does tell you what kind of life he's led, that it never occurs to him that this guy was lying and bragging to his girlfriend.
And I want to know what breed tree it is that grows so super big that its branches are like tunnels to where you can go in and come out one side and somebody can go in and come out a different side.
It's the same tree that Luke Skywalker goes into on Dagobah.
Okay.
Except this one has things that you didn't bring with you.
No, so I remember Modulok because I remember the toy, and I remember I never saw this episode as a kid because I never saw Modulok in the cartoon. I thought he was cool, but in the mini comic, he's also trying to impress Hordak to join the gang, and his toy came with different faces, like he could split himself up into 3 different Moduloks.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly remember a frame where 3 different Moduloks of 3 different heights are sitting in a row trying to impress Hordak. But anyways, I guess.
Well, and that's kind of the plot here. He wants to join up with Skeletor.
Right.
Skeletor's like, who are you?
Yeah, you were a wimp scientist, so you could be a wimp villain. Prove it to me. And he decides to prove it by being a better villain than Skeletor ever was.
Yeah, Skeletor and Cobra Commander, they think they're so much better than they are.
So I did appreciate, like we said, that the secret identity was rarely an element in this series, but it was very prominent here.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say not in a Lois Lane way, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that there might be a secret identity, and then He-Man and Adam are going, okay, what's this guy gotten himself into?
Mm-hmm. Maybe if you wanted to imagine the first time Lois Lane suspects that, Clark is Superman is because something like this happens where it becomes so obvious. But yeah, this guy's completely manipulating the situation to make her believe, which is very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah, he deserves to be dumped.
He really does. I mean, okay, we have to assume that, generally speaking, she's a lot nicer to him than she is in the opening scene, because she really kind of runs him down in the opening scene and doesn't realize or doesn't care to realize what effect she's having on him. But then later in the episode, of course, she's like, of course I love you exactly the way you are, which leads me to believe that there is a bit more affection built into their relationship's history that we just didn't see at the beginning. I might be thinking about it more than the writers did.
I think in the beginning it was a lot more of her, she was definitely infatuated with He-Man. And Farron, he does not have He-Man's physique. And he wasn't buying it. So I could see, he was trying to say, well, I could be like that. And she's going, yeah, no.
You'd have to be built almost like, I don't know, maybe Prince Adam.
Yeah.
Or Man-at-Arms, or Skeletor, or any of the other male characters.
Yeah. All right. So, any other comments on mistaken identity? All right. So that was our antepenultimate episode here.
Haha.
To use one of John's favorite words, as listeners to Superman in Crisis will know. Now we have the games. So, I need to read all on this. It's a longer plot synopsis. The alien Bendari select 2 warriors to pit good against evil. Because Adam is prevented from turning into He-Man in time, Fisto is chosen as the heroic warrior. Meanwhile, Skeletor has amplified Spycore's evilness to make sure he won't be chosen himself. During the game, however, the evil warriors are allowed to cheat, while good must try to win without resorting to such tactics.
Because evil is being evil and good has to be good.
Yeah, they have to show their own principles. So this is basically Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, but in He-Man. And yes, the Secret Wars comics had been published about a year prior.
So a couple of interesting things about this one. I think this, from a lore perspective, this is the one that sets up that Fisto is the strongest hero character next to He-Man. And in an odd one for a J. Michael Straczynski episode, and again, I don't know who was choosing which characters to use when, but you get Beastman and Merman, who are kind of considered the more classic villains because they were in that first set of figures.
In the first set of episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both, but yeah, they were the first wave toys as well. And Fisto, I remember Fisto. He had that. There was Fisto and Gisto figures, and Fisto, they both had the spring-loaded arms. So Fisto could pump and Gisto could chop.
Again, it was both the can we use the same mold, and they were kind of falling into the not evil duplicate, but everybody had an opposing person. Like the other ones that I remember were Mossman and Stinkor, because Mossman had like the pine air freshener scent, and Stinkor was a skunk figure that they used the patchouli oil as like the scent for it. But you had the good guy figure that smelled, and then you had the bad guy figure that smelled. And like you said, Fisto and Jitsu were the good guy with giant hand that punches, bad guy with giant hand that chops, kind of yin and yang.
Yeah, not quite to the point they would get to with the characters that transform into rocks, probably to compete with Transformers, where it was literally one mold, 2 paint jobs.
I remember the character who transformed into a rock. Whoa, I haven't thought about him in 30 years.
I remember vividly because I was excited. I wanted them. I saved up my allowance. I bought one. I got home, and my mom was upset because she'd already bought that one for me for my birthday. So if I flipped the toy cost the other way and gotten the other one, I would have had both. Instead, I bought myself one, and the other one got given away to a cousin or neighbor or something.
Such is life.
Yep. But yeah, aside from this basically being the Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, and what the synopsis leaves out is that when He-Man transforms, he is allowed to take Fisto's place, and he ends up winning because these games are as well balanced for point scoring as Quidditch, where they're trying to find these balls where most of them are worth 100 points, but there's this one out there that's worth 2,000. So He-Man has to play catch up by getting the 2,000 point ball, and then he wins, even though he almost sacrificed his victory to help the other side. I
liked the concept that He-Man doesn't exist on the planet whenever Adam is not He-Man. It's like a Billy Batson Shazam thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very much a Captain Marvel thing. And that works with whichever version of Captain Marvel you want to use, but
right, because eventually they turned Captain Marvel on the Marvel side into the same concept as Captain Marvel on the Fawcett side.
Yeah. Actually, one other comment about Spikor. I had that toy too. I learned to put him away for sure after getting up in the middle of the night one night. Stepping on Spikor is almost like stepping on Lego.
I never had that happen to me, but I can, or with the Spikor figure at least, but I can completely see it.
So, shall we move on to the Cold Zone?
Our final episode.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was actually the final episode broadcast in this series as well. So Cobra Khan asks He-Man for help in restoring the eternal flame of his people, the Reptons. The heroic warriors agree to a truce, but find themselves betrayed as soon as they enter the Cold Zone. So this synopsis leaves out the detail that Cobra Khan was actually the one who extinguished the eternal flame. He framed the heroic warriors for it and was promising that, he could bring it back if you grant me a wish. Or they offered to grant him any wish, and he says, okay, I'll bring the flame back if you make me ruler. And then the heroes eventually prove their innocence.
So this was the other one that I was talking about, to where the Reptons are a real living, breathing culture. The eternal flame superstition works with the whole cold-blooded, warm-blooded nature of just being a reptile race. And the only thing really about this is, based off of this episode, why is Cobra Khan jobbing for Skeletor? Like, this was mastermind level plan.
Although it did require that they agree to give him any wish, and that they agree to not go back on that when he says, well, I want to be king. And they don't be like, yeah, but that's not a good wish. Stop it. Taking those assumptions in stride, this is a really, really, complex, elaborate ruse here that works rather well.
Yeah, it's definitely beyond anything I remember Skeletor coming up with.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, a lot of Skeletor's plans were actually Evil Lynn's plans. As I think it was John said in this podcast earlier, Skeletor likes to take credit for other ideas.
Mm-hmm. I came up with that plan. We haven't mentioned it on any of our single discussions, but so many of these episodes revolve around discovering the secrets of Castle Grayskull. And I realize that that's just like a phrase you can say as a MacGuffin because Castle Grayskull is cool and you don't want it to get invaded and the kids be like, okay, yeah. But also, what happens when you get inside? Like, is there a shelf with books? Is there a room with a door over it that says the secrets? I mean, you get inside Castle Grayskull, then what happens?
It's never stated whether it's unlimited power or, is it the glowing orb of awesomeness? But, piggybacking off of that, John, if you described as like your elevator pitch for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe that a team of good warriors fight a team of evil warriors to stop them from getting the secrets of an ancient castle.
That works.
It works. It's not in Straczynski's plots.
I mean,
Grayskull's not really, other than the titular by the power of Grayskull's not really mentioned in any of these.
Only as a MacGuffin. Like, getting the secrets of Castle Grayskull is that 3 or 4 of the episodes here have that as their plan.
Yeah, anytime Skeletor is involved, because that's all he wants.
Right. But
I was just thinking, like, doing other things and focusing on other aspects of the world and everything to eventually achieve that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some of that might be because the secrets of Castle Grayskull are that's what the sorceress has access to. And that's how she made the sword. She split the swords of power, enchanted the one that she was given to Prince Adam, told him the passphrase that he uses to turn into He-Man. The phrase that we only once see him use and not in these 9 episodes. He says, let the power return to change back into Adam. I remember as a kid wondering, how does he change back? Because I was playing with the toys and I had the transformation and I had the Adam figure as well. I'm like, wait a minute, how does it go the other way?
I think that was in the comics, let the power return. I feel like I have seen that, but can't remember specifically.
Yeah, it may have been in the Star Comics run.
But not in the mini comics?
It could be. I've got to pull that collection back out. I've got like I'm going to call it the trade paperback for lack of a better word. I've got the trade paperback collection of the mini comics.
Yeah, I forgot they released that. Yeah, all the mini comics. That was a really cool release.
So, do we have any closing thoughts about the Cold Zone or these episodes in general?
Trey, what are your overall closing thoughts?
I thought these were really refreshing, and like I said, I know you pointed out, John, that some of them did have the secrets of Grayskull motivation to the villains. What I found refreshing from them is they went against the type of, like what I just said was the tagline of the show. I mean, yes, it's heroes and villains, but you don't have the typical masterminds. Skeletor's not the focus of most of them, and that means even when you see the familiar villains, you have people like Cobra Khan or Evil Lynn stepping up as the mastermind instead of being a flunky, which I found to be really refreshing. What made these easier to somewhat binge was it wasn't the same plot and the same characters every single episode, which was kind of what I thought I would get starting to watch them.
Yeah, the episodes that we watched for this do a great job of showing the breadth of the world, the various kinds of concepts going on in He-Man's universe, the different kinds of stories that can be told. Yeah, there's not a lot of repetition other than a few scripting choices that were probably completely subconscious because it's just, he has words in his mind that he, come out in his scripts. And that's one of those things that when you're a writer, you have to be careful about or have beta readers watching against. But yeah, this was a solid run of episodes. And if all of He-Man were of this quality, I would probably go ahead and do a rewatch sometime here in the near future. But knowing that it's not, I'm probably just going to let these represent He-Man in my mind and go about my life.
Yeah, if you're craving more, check the writing credits and skip to the Paul Dini episodes and the DC Fontana episodes. Having seen more of a sample, it's really uneven. Yeah, that's what I found. As a kid, I thought this was gold pretty much every single day. There were very few I disliked. As an adult, I realized that, yeah, the expectations for children's TV were very different. Yeah. And JMS is going to start changing that because this was his first experience with television. So yeah, he was playing a little outside the box by trying to build the world rather than just play with the existing toys. But as we'll see when we cover the other series that he's involved with, he is one of the first people who says, let's just never talk down to the kids and let's assume they are smart enough to follow this because kids are more intelligent than we give them credit for. So rather than try to write to the lowest common denominator, let's push them and help them reach that next step and challenge them a little. So you could see some of that here, especially as I said, a lot of these episodes, you know, like the one where He-Man loses his powers. The magic falls. And Orko loses his powers. And there's times where, you know, He-Man or Adam and his power sword are separated. They had to work together. So different. I remember trying to predict the morals. In this one, it's like, you know, Orko learns this, He-Man learns this, Man-at-Arms learns this. There are so many options to pick from. Yeah, I'm happy that I had the chance to go back and refocus on this, because when I tried watching the DVDs, I was just done with it and wasn't going to return. So the fact that John and I decided, yeah, let's look at specifically Straczynski's work. Now I remember that, okay, so those memories of having great stuff are not totally unfounded. I have matured and it's not as great as I thought it was, but there was some basis to it. So,
right. And palates change over time. You like broccoli now too?
No, broccoli is on my very long list of allergies. So
you don't like broccoli anymore. You still don't like broccoli, even though you didn't like it as a kid. But there are things.
Yes, I no longer put ketchup on everything. Now that's moving to barbecue sauce. Although now I've actually had people comment that I will pair barbecue sauce with meats like people pair wines. At one point, you know, before my wife and I got married and we had to, you know, budget with a kid in the house, at one point I had like 17 different flavors of barbecue sauce in the pantry. Because this is good for chicken if you prepare it this way, but this is good for chicken if you prepare it this way, and this is better for pork. All right, so I think that about wraps up this conversation. But thank you very much for joining us, Trey. We had a blast.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
Yeah, we should see if we can get you back perhaps in the very near future.
We could probably make that happen.
All right. And for listeners, our next conversation is in 2 weeks' time when we take a look at Chrysalis, the intended season 1 finale, which will air a week before the season 2 premiere.
Yes. I'm very excited to see how that goes. I don't know what a chrysalis is, but I will.
Yes. Although we did get a hint that Belen was trying to, you know, shield that part of her mind.
Well, she shielded it from me.
All right. So join us in 2 weeks' time for Chrysalis, and thank you for listening.
And good eating to you. In today's episode, we learned that talking down to children in your cartoons and comic book scripts is never a good idea. Kids can be smart. So remember, don't talk down to kids and they won't talk down to you.